What's going on, y'all? How you doing? Alright, so I had a situation arise this weekend that gave me the idea for today's topic. And it's going to be a little bit more technical. I'll try to keep most of the technical out of it, just so it's a little easier digesting, a little easier to read, a little easier to watch. Nobody likes sitting and reading a textbook, so I'm just going to give you general concepts and theories. But anyhow, it's basically this. So a lot of folks, when they're building forced induction Harley engines, they will build the most power possible on the engine, and then they will add boost to it. And that is one way to do it. I'm not going to say I've never done it that way, because I have. But you're typically at the mercy of the octane of the fuel when you do that. So it really depends on what fuel you're running as to how much power you can make. You will reach a knock limit of that fuel. And you definitely will do that when you're force inducting an engine. It's something you run into naturally aspirated as well. But you can run into it real easy when you're adding, a bunch of boost. We had an engine this weekend that came in, was built elsewhere. And again, I'm not saying it was done wrong. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying I don't agree with the way the work was done. Basically, the methodology behind the way it was done. And basically what they had done is this. They had built an engine that, for an all-motor setup, made pretty serious power. Now, they were kind of left to contend with what they had. They started out with a nitrous engine that had massive intake valve, massive exhaust valves. I mean, this thing had 2.3 intake valves. That's huge. They had 1.9 exhaust valves. They're B2 heads. They're huge. Everything about this thing is huge. The bore was huge. The stroke is not huge. It's an over square engine. It's bigger bore than it is stroke. So it's an engine that likes to rev. Monster camshaft in it, or camshafts. It's a twin cam engine. So it had huge camshafts in it. And then on top of that, they had larger ratio rocker arms in it. So the big cam just got even bigger. And all of that sounds great when you're building a naturally aspirated engine. That's exactly how it's done. The squish band, basically the distance between the edge of the piston and the edge of the cylinder head around the outside ring of the piston, right at the top of the crown there, was very tight. And again, for a naturally aspirated engine, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. That is how you do it. That is what it takes to make big power. Now, this was in a turbo bike. So, as a turbo bike, that's one way to do it, but you will run into the knock limit of your fuel very quickly. Even what they were running for fuel, which was alcohol is what it was, not methanol, but alcohol. There's still a limitation to just how much pressure that stuff can take. And it was E90, so the octane is high in E90, but there just is a limit. The other thing they ran into is space. So running those monster intake valves, those huge intake valves, you run into a condition where the bore that they had with the intake valve that they have didn't leave much space between the cutout in the top of the piston for the valve. You have to pocket the top of the piston for the valve. So the cutout that was made, it left very, very little material from the edge of the cutout to the edge of the piston. Now, in a natural aspirated engine or something like that, that's not as big a deal because cylinder pressures aren't quite as high. But in a forced induction engine, he was running, I believe, 16 psi on it, if I remember right, is what he told me. So 16 is a lot. 16 psi, it's going to over double what it makes on motor. So, which is a lot. I mean, the bike is fast. It ran a sub 9-second quarter mile, so it's not playing around. We're talking about a bagger, so thing very fast. But that being said, the engine lasted, from what I've been told, less than 20 passes before it had a piston failure. Now, that's not actually why it was torn down. It wasn't torn down over the piston failure. It was torn down over some broken cylinder head studs. It had actually snapped the studs that hold the cylinder head down to the cylinder. So he brought it to me and I tore it down, just gonna help him out and throw some studs in it in the gasket, torque it back down, and found cracked piston. And basically it had broken from the eyebrow, the cutout. It had broken that from the valve pocket through the ringland on the intake valve, just because there was really very minimal material left, and it had even been touching against the valve. Now, to be completely fair, probably part of the reason that it was touching is it broke the studs. So when it broke two of those studs, the cylinder started rocking, which means that the piston was allowed to move forward and back. So it was clipping the edge of the valve. But that gives you an idea how close the tolerances were in this engine. If he had a little more bore, a little less valve, something of that nature, he would have been able to have a little more clearance, a little more safety margin, and wouldn't have had the failure that he had, and would have been able to run a whole bunch more boost. In this case, you could have run less cam, less valve, less compression, and made a whole lot more power. Whether it really needed more or not, but that would have been the end result. So anyhow, hopefully that gives you some insight into what's going on. Forced induction engines are not always like natural aspirated engine. I'm not saying that you don't build the engine, to make power. You do, but you rely a lot on your method of forced induction. So, all right, y'all, take care.